I'd like to talk about something much more enjoyable this time, and that is nailing the traitors. That is holding treacherous leaders and other actors and agents to account for the harmful political actions that they're inflicting upon us. At the moment, I don't see why we shouldn't talk about this. They're doing this to us. Sam Melia is in prison, basically, fundamentally, for his thoughts about other people's feelings. And also, all the time, this curve, if you see that curve keeps going up and up towards the ceiling. That's a total arrivals into the UK for June 2023. I think that went up to about 1.5 million up to December 2023. The higher that line goes, the higher it goes, and the worse the politicians get. The more immigrants get imported, the more the politicians want to crawl to them by promising to import more immigrants. So it's a vicious cycle. I think we have every right to talk about how we're going to hold them to account if the current system breaks down. These people, we may have elected them, but they are not mere delegates. They don't simply go there and do what we tell them. They are representatives. They're there to express their judgment on our behalf. Currently, they're expressing their judgment against us. And I sense a widespread feeling of betrayal brewing around this, and it's right for us to address that. It's right for us to deal with that. So just to recap, I don't think any of the current problems we're facing, economic, financial, civilizational, and the problems of invasion, I don't think we're going to deal with those through legislation or by voting or by reforming our way out of it. I think we're going to collapse our way out of it by the system getting so top heavy that it collapses itself. I think it will keep on doing the harm that it's doing until it collapses for economic reasons. I think that economic and financial collapse will mean a welfare collapse, a breakdown of the welfare state, and I think that will then drive the majority of us nuts, and we will then that will collapse our desire to obey the state, because I think welfare is currently what we vote for. That's what we think the state is for, not the apparatus of the state creating order, but the state giving out free stuff. If that stops happening, I think we will say we don't have to obey the state anymore. It's broken its side of the bargain. So I think we're living at the end of the age of the state. I think it will collapse. What comes after, I think, is what interests me. Now, as you know, I think that the problems we face currently, particularly the problems of invasion, they are deliberate. I don't think they are unfortunate byproducts of otherwise humane and civilized policies. I think they are the policy: crime, fear, guilt, division, the rise of thuggery, impoverishment, the dilution of wages, the increase in housing costs, other capital costs, housing shortage, the loss of a sense of identity and home, and a commonwealth of interest. I think those things are deliberate, and I think if the system collapses itself, then I think there will rightly, understandably, be calls for treacherous actors, treacherous powerful people who've used their power against us to face some kind of retribution. Now, the reason I think that's right and that's okay, well, I think there are three reasons. The first reason is I think you need to impose deterrence for civilizational crimes against you. So you need to show to potential traitors a century or 2 centuries down the road into the future that if they do that, they will be got. These are the kind of people you are dealing with. Retribution will be extracted from you. Don't think about treachery. It is not in your interest. It is not profitable. Look what happened to these people who tried it. It didn't work for them in the long run. So you need to create a kind of long-term civilizational deterrence to potential traitors in the future. You never know where they're going to come from, what they're going to do. You can't predict that, but you can impose some kind of apprehension that will be effective for them even a long way into the future. The second thing, I think, is to discipline the current crop of politicians. I don't think they're going to listen now, but if the system approaches collapse, and they're thinking about getting really desperate and doing ruthless things against us, I think it will be helpful if they have in mind that there is some kind of proposed system to hold treacherous enemy politicians and other actors, other agents to account. As I say, I don't think they'll listen now, but they might if and when the system starts to break down further. Now, the third thing is money. I think it is right and poetic that people who have made, as politicians tend to, have made so much money by behaving so treacherously, should find that money is then taken from them in order to enable the fast and successful build-up of a new system to replace the old system that they were a part of and which collapsed. So if the system collapses, I think it is good that money can be taken out of them and used to make the new system successful. And a lot of politicians seem to have quite unseemly wealth. The connections that you can make by being involved in politics, particularly at senior levels, seem really I don't think they should happen, because it skews all the incentives for politicians being in the system. David Cameron, I don't want him to sue me for libel, so I'm not going to call him a traitor. He's simply an example of how much money politicians can make. He resigned as Prime Minister, and he very quickly got a job working for a finance firm. I think it was quite a dodgy firm, and that was Greensill Capital, and he's reported to have made $10 million out of working for that firm, which then went bust in not very nice circumstances. So I think that those are the three reasons. My underlying reason, it's not simply about getting people, making people regret the day they were born. It's about doing what's reasonably fair and what is justifiable under law, under clear, transparent law, without sadism. Now, if the system breaks down and we all lose our collective tempers, the idea of not succumbing to sadism, that might not matter to us then, but it will matter to the generations that come after. They are lumbered with the history that we make for them. I don't think it's effective. I don't think it's right to resort to cruelty and sadism. I think we're much better off working out what it is that we want to be achieved, what we want to achieve, why it's right to pursue these people. And to that extent, I think there is a trade-off between bloodlust and effectiveness. Basically, the wider you cast the net and the more brutal the punishments you impose, the less effective they're likely to be, because it creates fear and uncertainty in the rest of society, and that prevents society getting up confidently again afterwards. Now, so how would I do it? Well, before I talk about what I would do, what I'm proposing, what I want to talk about is how not to do it. And this struck me more than a decade ago when I went on a couple of EDL marches. One thing that struck me is the number of naive, I think probably kind of manipulated patsies who would come up to me at EDL demos saying we should hang Tony Blair. People seem to have a bee in their bonnet about hanging Tony Blair. Now the problem with that is that's just one man. If you do that, you're probably going to feel better afterwards. That means you're not going to go after anyone else. Everyone else gets away with it, but you've managed to hang him through an act of a certain amount of cruelty, really. Hanging an old man I think is pretty cruel. And what it tends to do very fast is to light the touch paper for the creation of a class of thugs and bullies. That spreads like wildfire if you give it even temporary permission. So it's not effective, it's not thorough. You need to think through what you're doing. Now, there's a long list of historical examples that I could go through. I could talk about the hangings, drawings and quarterings after the English Restoration in 1660, or I could talk about the relative success of the Glorious Revolution 28 years later. But what I'd really like to talk about is three examples from France. I'm not knocking the French. I like France, I like the French, but France has a vivid history. It does provide some vivid historical examples, and we're not that different from them. So, and these examples, I think, are examples of how not to do it. Now, the first one I want to look at is the head shavings of 19 August 1944. They didn't just happen in France, they happened in the Netherlands, in Belgium and in Norway when the Germans pulled out. But I want to give you this example. If I show you that there, that's well, if I go back to here, I've turned off the volume. So what you can see there, that's ladies getting their hair cut by mobs and getting paraded around. There we are. Now that's I think actually that's in some ways that's quite understandable. I don't think it's okay for women to give them to sleep with invaders or to get married to invaders. But I don't think dealing with it that way is something to be proud of. I don't think France is very proud of it. That clip was from the Netherlands. I don't think the Dutch are very proud of that. What British intelligence officers who were underground, what they reported was that the worst head shavers tended to be the worst collaborators with the most to hide. And so those worst people got away. It's not really effective. The French referred to it as the savage purification. So, and that savagery, it may be satisfying at the time, but it doesn't work. So the next thing I want to look at is the French Revolution. And what you had there was, if I go here, I'll go back here. What you had there was various laws. That was the law of the 22nd Prairial. I think that had another term. That was, the law of suspects, that one. And then you had also the law, no, that was the law of suspects. That was referred to as the law of terror. And what those laws, they were hastily drawn up laws, badly thought through. They effectively gave very wide powers of arrest for very vaguely defined offences and put a lot of power into the Committee of Safety and the enforcers of that law, who could pretty much go out and arrest who they wanted, condemn them, and then execute them. And a lot of ordinary people who had were nothing to do with the old regime, they got executed. And there was a kind of an unthought through frenzy in French society at the time to punish and get away from the old regime that had gone before by scapegoating aristocrats, emigres and speculators. And it wasn't effective. The harm it did was to disable society, because you create a lot of fear and uncertainty. No one really knows if they're going to be hauled in front of a tribunal themselves. And it also means that the class of people that you need to run society, administrators and bureaucrats, they tend to be taken out of the system, and then you just can't administer society. So and that doesn't work. If you want to see a really horrible example of how that works even less, then you look at Lenin's Cheka after the Russian Revolution. Very bloody, very sadistic, and pretty much brought society to a standstill, which contributed to the terrible famine and shortages which you saw in Leninist Russia. Now, the third example that I'd like to look at is the system of what was called national degradation. If I just show you this here, if I go to this one, that was indignité nationale. That's what it was called in France in 1945. For about 6 years after 1945, you had a court or courts of national degradation. And what they did was to take away the civic rights of people and to condemn them, to say they were nationally degraded. So they couldn't stand for office, they couldn't vote. They weren't particularly serious punishments. It was more symbolic than anything else. And I think about 125,000 people, that's a lot of people, were dragged in front of those courts by state prosecutors. About 50,000 were condemned, and about 40,000 of those people received prison terms, and 700 to 800 were executed. Now, you could say it's kind of like Nuremberg light, except like Nuremberg, even though it had the French courts went through a lot of people, it wasn't able to go through the number of people who had behaved in a treacherous way. If you compare that with, I think, something like 2, maybe 3 million French individuals wrote to the Gestapo during the occupation wanting to condemn people. You see the magnitude of the problem. I don't think a state system like that can behave effectively. It's too meat-fisted. So the more I look at that, although I think it was an impressive effort on the part of the French, I think it wasn't particularly workable. I think there are only some elements of it that I like. I think it's much better dealt with by private operators, bounty hunters, rather than by state prosecutors. Now, bear with me. The problem with long terms of imprisonment and execution is it's kind of bloodthirsty, it's expensive, and with those prison sentences, what tends to happen is they might get 20 years in jail and they get let out after 2 or 3 years because society moves on and changes its mind. It tends not, and that affects the deterrent that you're hoping to impose to deter people, say a century down the line. You need to stick to the punishments that you impose, and I don't think a status system does that very well. Now, how would I do it? Well, the first thing, what I would do is I would observe 2 civil legal rules of civil procedure. And there, firstly, if you're creating liability, firstly, you should have a definable or limited extent of liability, so people can work out what is it that I might be liable for. What is it that I could get done for? Am I on the hook for this? Am I in the frame for this? And that means that the majority who are not in the frame, they can work out that they're not in the frame, and they can just get on with their lives without thinking about it, without being frightened. So you create certainty. And the second thing is you need to have a limited, definable class of potential defendants. Again, so that the bulk of society can say, well, I'm not in that group, I'm not liable to be got. It's not aimed at me. Now, sometimes you get another rule which is put forward, is that there should be a definable level of liability, so you don't have unlimited liability. I think unlimited liability is actually okay in these circumstances. I think when you're talking about civilizational crimes, I think it's okay for the person that you go after for them to be liable to cough up all their assets, or to spend the rest of their life in and out of the bankruptcy court. So if they then go away and make some money, they can be hauled back into court again and have that money taken off them. So I don't think you need to have a limited level of liability, but I think the what people are liable for and the group of people who are liable, that needs to be defined and definable. Yeah, there are more recent examples, or in the last sort of 20 or 30 years, of environmental legislation in the States where civil liability hasn't observed those rules, and it's effectively got out of hand and not succeeded. It's been far too broad brush because it's imposed unlimited liability on people who can't work out if they're going to be liable or not. So again, I think there's a trade-off between the breadth and aggression of the legislation that you enact that gets people, and the effectiveness of it on the other hand. Okay, now what I would do is to create a system of which allows for bounty hunters. So I wouldn't rely on private state prosecutors. I would set up the court, set up the legislation, but the people who bring the cases before it, I would simply open that up to anyone in society, so that lawyers and specialist lawyers can get going, finding, locating, snatching and interrogating former politicians and bringing them before the court in order to extract their assets from them. Now, I take as a guide on that well-known political philosopher Eddie Murphy from the movie Trading Places, where he says that the best way to get back at rich people is to turn them into poor people. And effectively what that means is you don't prosecute them and hang them, you get you subject them to civil suits, like suing someone, and you enable any private citizen, any lawyer, any greedy money-grabbing lawyer to grab a politician, have the legal authority to bring them in front of the court, and then sue them for everything they've got. And if you then delegate that, your legal system can delegate that to privateers and bounty hunters who are operating under a system kind of analogous to or similar to the prize money system that made the Royal Navy so successful and so aggressive and so thorough in fighting off aggressors and preserving trade routes around the world, particularly in the 18th century. And what you do is you enact legislation which says any member of this or that group who's guilty of this, that, or this or that wrongdoing, they can be sued. And at the highest level, all their property can be taken from them. And this has the example of thoroughness, because if there is a politician with treachery on his hands, some money-grabbing lawyer is likely to ferret him out. Because if you think about it, that politician is likely to have a house. If that lawyer, by launching one case, can get that house off that politician, that lawyer is going to jump at it like a ferret up a trouser leg, like a rat up a drain. And what that means is there's very unlikely to be any escape for those politicians. The second advantage, or a further advantage, is that if you enact that kind of law, you can then say that bounty hunting lawyer must split the winnings with you, the legal system. And if you do that, that money then enables the legal system, the polity, the system that you are then getting up. It enables that system to get off the ground because it has more money to employ administrators and bureaucrats to help it getting up fast. And I think, as a general rule, if the system that we have collapses, the one thing we'll need to do is to get up a new system under the benefit of law as fast and successful as we can. And if we can get money quickly out of former treacherous politicians, which will finance that system and help it to get off the ground fast, then I think that money, then I think that is beneficial. That is good. That is good for us. Bear with me. Finally, what it does, if you contract the job of arrest and prosecution, if you contract that out to bounty hunters, it farms out the task of asset tracing. That's quite hard. State authorities tend to be quite meat-fisted about that. I don't think, in the modern world, I don't think statist-type authorities have the money and the agility or the greed, the financial motivation to do the job of tracing people who might jump ship, go abroad and hide their assets around the world. I think freelancers are going to be much better at it. They're going to do a much better job of finding where people are hidden, where they've hidden their assets, who they've transferred their assets to, much better than some custard-faced judge can do. And the bounty hunters, I think, will be much better up to the quite sober task of extracting that information from suspects in a way that's efficient and not too brutal. And I think it's good for the legal system not to have to dirty its hands with that. That matters because I think this is an area where I think it is appropriate to be ruthless, getting the information out of suspects about where their assets are, who they have hived them off to, where they've hidden them, and then to bring them before the court, string them upside down, beat them with a carpet rod until the money falls out of their pockets. I'm talking metaphorically, of course. And I think private operators are just going to be much more efficient and quick off the mark about doing that. And they'll do that with a kind of ruthlessness and efficiency, which I think is necessary. And I don't think that the legal system wants to dirty its hands with. And if you're able to do that, the result of that will probably be that former treacherous politicians will have the incentive to cut a deal, to come forward, to surrender themselves, and to say, I know I'm in the frame, I know I'm on the hook, I don't want to get arrested and dragged in front of a court, I want to come to a deal with you, save you the trouble of suing me and save me the trouble of getting arrested and interrogated. I'll come clean about what I've got. Let me keep a quarter of it. Let me keep 10%. Let me keep half of it. You get the rest. You don't have to go to any work. You can do it without any court proceedings at all. We just come to some agreement, and then afterwards I'm protected. I can't get prosecuted again. I can then get on with my life. Now, I think that again makes it a lot cleaner, a lot quicker, a lot more consensual, a lot less brutal. I think it's worth doing that way. The benefit to having some kind of bounty hunting system that gets money out of people is that if you say to the lawyers, the money grabbing lawyers who are doing it, if you say to them, you have to give a percentage of that money, transfer it to the legal system which is enabling you to take those proceedings, then some of that money could get put towards a system or a tokenistic court of national degradation, a bit like the French used after 1945, where you simply pronounce that people have been judged to be traitors or former traitors, and they are then under the stigma of that humiliation, that indignity. And that doesn't really require a lot of money, because that, again, I don't think you need state prosecutors to do that. It's a way of deterring, of getting people who may have committed acts of treachery but who now have no assets. So lawyers won't want to go after them because there's no money to be made out of it, but they can be brought in, they can still be brought in front of a court and have their treachery exposed and pronounced on. And what I think is, and that's one thing I do quite like about the statist system. That's something that can be taken from the French example and from the example of the Nuremberg courts or the International Criminal Court, is that the show trial element of good public due process is actually quite effective. It's effective in discrediting the system and the politicians that went before, and kind of distancing your new system from it and coming to terms with what has gone before. So I think there is a good element to that which we can take. And what I think is all the better about it is that it's so much easier in the era of the internet, which has the memory of an elephant and the forgiveness of the asp. And that can be done by ordinary people rummaging around on the internet. There are some very effective digital sleuths out there who can scour the dark corners of the web before the old judge has even learned how to log on to Facebook. Okay, so that's basically what I'm proposing. Don't go for stringing people over lampposts. Don't say we're going to hang Tony Blair and that's it. Don't go for horrible punishments and executions. You don't need any of those statist solutions. You don't need to hang, draw and quarter people. What I would propose is firstly, the main meat of it is setting up a system that enables bounty hunters, private lawyers, to drag the guilty before the court, get the information about them, out of them about their assets, and then get their assets out of them. And the second thing, subject to that, I think some kind of tokenistic court of national degradation that can humiliate people for what they've done, label them as former traitors. And now the question then is, who goes on that list? Who do you go after? This is the nice bit. Frustratingly, that really isn't my aim. My aim here is to show how you can set up a system that can hold former treacherous politicians to account. I want to describe the method to do it. I'd rather leave it to other people to calibrate it. But I'll go through a few examples and just to give you food for thought. MPs, what about MPs? Well, they would seem to be the obvious example. I can't think of an example of a politician in the last 25 years who has been anything other than pretty treacherous. I refer again to this chart of people coming into the UK. Those numbers are just hitting the ceiling. That arrow is going up to the ceiling. It's continuing to go up towards the ceiling. So I think politicians are the obvious people to be in the frame for that. And I don't have much sympathy for them if they find themselves in the frame. Maybe you might say, well, we only go up against the big leaders. That's up to you to calibrate. Second, what about NGOs? Why do Care for Calais spring to mind? What should happen to Care for Calais? Should their budget be taken away? What if they're no longer operating then? What about the people who work for them and took a salary? Should we go after them? That's organisations like that. Should they be included? Well, I leave that to you to judge for yourselves. It seems to me that at the other end, not every stupid, charitable idiot or hotelier should get bankrupted for life simply because they had the wrong politics. That might be an obvious example for humiliation via a court of public degradation as a result of at the hands of the web sleuths. Now, what about traitorous social media activists? Again, I think they're best left to public embarrassment, maybe again given a declaration in a court of public degradation. And I come back again. The wider the net, the greater the atmosphere of fear and uncertainty that you create for the new system that you're trying to get off the ground. What you want, if you're trying to get off a new system, you want your society to be confident and to feel sure of itself. And that fear and uncertainty can undermine that. And so to that end, I think it's important to bear in mind the reasons why you would want to hold former treacherous actors to account on what you're trying to achieve. Firstly, deterrence in the long term. Traitors a century or so hence, they need to have a deterrent in mind. They need to know that these people have a habit of getting traitors, so not to do it. Don't succumb to the temptation to be traitors in a century's time. Secondly, disciplining of the current crop of politicians if the system starts to break down, as I think it will. And the third one is to get money to finance a new system so it can get off the ground fast, so we can set up a new system quickly and successfully. And again, I think that is poetic justice if the people who've done so much to break down, to behave so badly, to make the system behave so treacherously towards us, and to make it effectively collapse. I think it is poetic justice if the assets that they've got as a result of it are taken off them to help make the new system thrive and flourish. So what I'm hoping overall we can do is to decently and humanely put together a constructive system of retribution that rights wrongs, whilst simultaneously helping to construct a new system, a new polity afterwards. So I hope those methods are helpful, and I hope that's something that people can work with. Thank you.